Okay, so let me do this then. Next, I want to go, again, we're about 5 minutes above the top of the hour. I need to find Jose Ruiz. There, so he is here, but it looks like he hasn't joined yet.
No, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. Okay, sorry. Oh, Pepe. Okay, I'm sorry, sir.
Yeah, I go by Pepe.
let me do a brief introduction.
Okay.
So there is, and again, we are talking about the traits of extraordinary devices, and then you had some suggestions for the Alzofon experiment. There's a 3-step pattern you've written that constantly repeats itself across many extraordinary devices. If people would incorporate these steps into their own experiments, their chances of success would be dramatically increased. These devices tend to disrupt equilibrium at a quantum level in a known area. Energy is extracted out of the disrupted area and transferred to another location where it can be managed. And energy is used in real time somewhere outside of the device. So in your presentation, you talked about going into the details of these 3 prevailing traits, as well as providing some examples and a hypothesis of how and why this helps them to work. And then again, as you mentioned before, you have a suggested Alzofon experiment to incorporate this pattern. So Pepe, please take it away, sir. And do you have a screen share?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go for it.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Well, first of all, thank you, Tim, for letting me present my stuff, my ideas. And thank you for letting other people present too. I learned a lot from them. And thank you, everybody, okay? It's amazing what you guys are doing and all the things that you helped me. So I hope I can help you at least as much as you have helped me with this, all right? Okay, let's start. Well, the title is Prevailing Traits in Extraordinary Devices and Its Possibilities in Anti-Gravity. I designed this presentation for researchers, scientists, enthusiasts. I hope if you incorporate these changes, you're gonna be successful. If you created something and you didn't get the results you wanted, I hope with this pattern, you're gonna be able to be successful. Also, I designed a little bit for possible investors. I know this is risky, but we're coming to a point where we're on the brink of making a breakthrough in scientists. And these people here at APEC are in the front line. And if you get on it right now, the benefits will be better in the long run. Okay, topics. I'm gonna be talking first about the premises and assumptions. We all have this baseline that we built on, all this scientific research that we've done before. And based on this scientific research, we built on. So I'm gonna go there first, energy conservation particularly. Then I'm gonna explain how the devices work, what my idea is. And then the 3 steps that I already mentioned. Disrupt equilibrium, transfer energy, and use some energy. Some examples and possibilities in anti-gravity. First of all, premises and assumptions, conservation of energy. The very first time I ever heard about these extraordinary devices and those devices that get more energy out than the one they put in, I immediately says, well, this is not right, okay? It's not true. But at some point, I started analyzing the energy balancing equations, and they don't incorporate many things. Like, for example, the mass. They don't incorporate the masses of ions, isotopes, quarks, neutrons, and all the elementary particles. Also, they don't include the decays. At some point, some atoms decay into alpha, beta, gamma decay, and they don't incorporate that. The kinetic energy of all particles in all degrees of freedom, they don't incorporate that either. Many of you said, oh yeah, kinetic energy is related to temperature and heat. Yeah, that's correct, but that is not correct all the time. Just to put things in perspective about what I'm talking about, like my old professor used to say, if you are able to get the energy of any mass of 1 kilogram of mass, you're gonna be able to power up the entire United States in one day. Just 1 kilogram of mass of any mass. So imagine there is a lot of energy on all the subatomic particles and the atomic particles that we're not considering. Also, there's magnetic field of Earth, gravity of Earth, kinetic energy, the moon, the sun, the galaxy, there is rotation, there is translation. There is a lot of energy. We're surrounded by energy that we're not considering. Okay, I'm not gonna go into the math or why, but you guys know about this. I don't wanna bother you with the details, but my point here is that whenever we talk about extraordinary devices, the first thing is like, no, it violates the rules of physics. It violates the second law of thermodynamics. So it violates the conservation of energy. Well, we have energy. There's lots of energy, and we don't include it on the equations. There are good reasons for it. I don't like to say impossible to accurately measure all the energy available, but there is energy. I'm gonna give you an example about this. When NASA wants to send a rocket to a different planet, they send the rocket first to the moon, they utilize the gravity of the moon, and then the rocket gets an impulse due to the gravity of the moon. That way you can save a lot of fuel and you can reach a longer distance with the rocket. But the energy provided by the moon is not felt or is not measurable by the moon. In theory, the moon slows down. That's the only way it can actually be explained. But can you measure how much the moon is slowed down? We can really measure that. As well as we cannot really measure if a device of extraordinary energy use some of the gravity of the sun or some of the gravity of the moon. We cannot really measure it. Well, that's one point. Another point about conservation of energy, I don't agree with many of the titles that they put into it, like tap into 0-point energy, ether, sea of energy, or especially the one I don't agree with is free energy. There is no such a thing as a free energy, okay? Nothing is free, not even energy. I believe these devices work, but not because their energy is free, because they get energy from any of these possibilities that I just showed you. Okay. Well, let me continue with some references. For those of you that would like to see some references, you can see them in your own time. I'm just gonna show it here. I'm not gonna go over them. That way I can let the Bill present too. Hopefully there's enough time. Yeah, I think there will be enough time for him to present too. Okay, Jenkins, Omaza, Selani. Now, how do extraordinary devices work? Okay, here's my definition. Extraordinary devices induce non-uniform fluctuations among atoms in such a way that the equilibrium is broken in some places. But when this happens, nature does what it does best, brings things to equilibrium, and it uses whatever means necessary. And this includes some energy rearrangements. And this is a good thing. That's where the energy comes from. Because at this time is when the energy is obtained from these devices, or we can obtain anti-gravity too. But let me go step by step. Let's go first for the non-uniform fluctuations. Okay, I got this image from a simulator. We have two charges, two positive, two negative charges, and the arrows represent the fields. The darker the arrow, the stronger the field. The lighter the arrow, the lighter the field. So in normal conditions, everything fluctuates, but nothing changes. It pretty much looks like this. When you start applying non-uniform fluctuations, you start looking into these spaces in the middle with lighter arrows. But it comes to a point, if you put another particle in here, equilibrium is broken. Things will never be the same, okay? Things will not accommodate the way it was. So you have this big space with lower energy density, right? This one, I put it here. Now, I was looking for a name for these spaces with lower energy density, and I couldn't really find a name. If any one of you find a name, please let me know. But for the time being, I'm gonna call it PEPs, okay? Why? Because some Pepe like to be called Pepe. Since I have to call it a name, let's do that. Wow, what are the PEPs? Well, they're like bubbles of lower energy density. They are small, they're really small. They have any 3D shape. It's a closed loop gradient, okay? It means that all around they have one measure of, for example, no, for anything, it could be heat, it could be magnetic field, gravity, polarity, but inside it has less of that, less pressure, less magnetic field, less gravity. Or it could be any combination of this. The higher the difference between the inside and the outside, the higher the impact. Now, let me explain more about it. Whenever there is a discrepancy like this, whenever there is a PEP, nature does what it does best, brings things to equilibrium. And this will make extraordinary devices work. They break equilibrium and then nature does the rest. Extraordinary devices work with nature. They don't work against it, okay? Let's do more. There's an analogy to airplanes, okay? I'm sure most of you guys already know how airplanes fly. I'm gonna explain a little bit to remind you. Let me just drink some water. My mouth is getting dry. Okay. What you see here on the screen is on the grayish rear shape is called the airfoil. And this is the shape of the wing. If you look at the wing from the side and then you make a cut, like a cross-sectional cut, this is what you'll see. Okay, these blue lines represent the air, and when the air goes this way, some particles go on top of the wing and some particles go under the wing, but the same particles have to meet at the end of the wing. Since the particles on top have to travel longer distance to meet with the other particle, they have to speed up, they have to run faster. If the particles run faster, that will apply less pressure to the top of the wing, and pressure is directly proportional to force. So when the airplanes are flying, there is a difference in force between the top of the wing and the bottom of the wing. When that force difference is higher than the weight of the entire airplane, then the airplane takes off. And that's how airplanes fly. Now, I'm gonna ask you these questions. How do the molecules on top of the wing know that they have to move faster? What tells them that they have to move faster, but just at this much speed? Have you ever thought about that? Well, I have a theory, and it's related to this PEP, so this lower energy density. What happens is that some lower energy density are formed on top of the wing. And these are the ones who tell the molecule to move a little bit faster. The molecules at this point, they don't know what's going on in the future. They don't know what's coming. They just adjust themselves to their current local conditions. Okay, and these PEPs are formed because you have the same amount of particles on top and the same amount of particles on the bottom. So the particles on top, they spaced out according to match up the whole wing, okay, to cover the whole wing. Obviously, they leave some spaces, and these spaces are the PEPs, or the lower energy density bubbles. So we already use a system like that. We just do not explain it this way. So what we can do is that what we can say is that energy changes, well, changes in energy density at molecular level is what makes airplanes fly. Well, now let me explain another way to visualize my hypothesis or my theory on energy density gradient. Imagine this ball, okay, it's sitting on a flat surface, horizontal surface, with no energy gradient. But if you move put one side, you put lower energy density, and higher in the other, the ball is going to start rolling down. If you put the opposite, it's going to roll down the opposite direction. Well, this is just an example to visualize the importance of energy density and how if we manage the energy density, we can manage nature. So having said this, pushing, pulling, or lifting are not the only ways to move a ball. It's time we think a little bit different. Science has been thinking traditionally into pushing a ball, like overcoming gravity or burning something or explode everything on an engine so we can get the power. Well, it's time to move outside that thinking. Why not moving the surroundings so we can get the desired results? Okay, now let's go to the pattern. First one, disrupt equilibrium. Second, transfer energy outside the disruption zone. And third, use that energy in real time. Okay, well, let's do step number one. Disrupting equilibrium means making these PEPs, making these three-dimensional areas where the energy density is less than the surroundings, okay? At the same time, when this is happening, because this is really important, when this is happening, we need to extract energy. But first of all, let me show you how are these PEPs refilled. Because nature, I have to refill them. That's what nature does all the time. Okay, brings things to equilibrium. But how does nature do that? Well, it uses whatever is available close by. It could be ions, neutrons, radiant energy, heat, magnetism, anything, okay? Anything you can think of. Nuclear orientation, which is the base of how we can overcome gravity. The spin, kinetic energy of any degree of freedom. I'm not sure if you guys have seen when water runs through a place for the first time. When water goes down, let's say a dry river, water doesn't respect anything. Water goes whatever it wants to go, but it doesn't make a decision in advance. It only follows what's next to it at the local area. Okay, if it has to go right, it goes right. And if it has to go left, it goes left. It doesn't care. Well, the same thing happens with nature when a PEP is formed. It gets to equilibrium using whatever is available around. Okay, now, what I say is nature takes the simplest, easiest, and fastest way possible to equilibrium. That's how nature acts. So we need to take this and use it towards our advantage. Okay, that's what the extraordinary devices do. They work with nature. Now, second point, extraordinary devices take the energy out of the disruption zone. Okay, for two reasons. The main reason is that if no energy is taken out of the disruption zone, things will go back to equilibrium. Okay, if nature takes the simplest way possible and all the energy is already there close by, nature uses that energy. Okay, why would it needs to make this extraordinary energy, or why will it take energy from any other method? It just take whatever is available. If it's everything is already out there, is saturated, well, it uses the same energy. But if you take some energy out of the disruption zone, then nature has to look for other ways to bring things to equilibrium. And that's when it takes anything else, ions, everything else that is close by. That's one reason. And actually, this is the single most important thing that I see people not doing in their experiments. And I believe if they just incorporate this system, if they just take energy out, they will get better results. Okay. Now, there is another reason why it's good to take energy out, just to make some room for bubbles or PEPs to grow up. What we're interested in is these low energy density spaces or PEPs. But if there's no space, they're not gonna grow. So we need to make some room for space. Let me have an analogy for this. These are bottles with water. I don't know if you play as a kid with this, but if you fill out this bottle with water and water with soap, and you shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it, no matter how much you shake it, you're not gonna see much bubbles, okay? Because there is no room for the bubbles to grow up. But if you take some water out and then you shake it, shake it, shake it, you will see some foam, you see some bubbles here. If you take even more water out and then you shake it again, you'll see that you get even more bubbles. This is what we need. We need to take the energy out of the system to be able to grow some bubbles. Okay, and that will leave some room for more energy rearrangements. Okay, the third step, use the energy in real time. Use it on your own device or use another device, whatever is, you can use it. This is important because it comes to a point where the whole device gets saturated energetically, okay? In one video, one person, I don't remember who it was, he said that his device was working and then all of a sudden it stopped. What they did, they just moved it to a different place on the same lab, but just a different place, and then it worked. Why? Because it was already saturated, okay? If you don't take the energy out, the device is gonna come to a point where everything is right there. Nature doesn't have to do anything extraordinary to bring things back to equilibrium. So nature doesn't do it if nature doesn't have to. That's why it's important to take energy out, completely out. Now, if one of these steps have to be synchronized, okay? You cannot leave one of these steps like George Holloway had to try to do at some point, that he tried to divide each single step and make sure that he measures everything. It's a good idea, but actually that's what made it not work, okay? Because all these three steps have to be synchronized and perfectly tuned, okay? And if one of these steps is not working or is not present, the whole device won't work. That's why this is important. Examples, I'm gonna go over some examples just to support this. Sorry about that noise. Each one of these examples requires a lot of time, okay? I'm not gonna go over them. It takes way too much time, but I'm just gonna point out the 3 steps that I'm talking about. Hopefully with these examples, you take the one you need for your own experiments and apply to your own experiments. And hopefully you make your device work. Okay, let me get some more water. Sorry. The first experiment I'm going to talk is about Takahashi experiment. He was able to get up to 1.7 times more energy out of the system than the one he used to run the system. What he used was amps intervals and different times and sawtooth waves. Well, he used ranges from 0.2 to 0.4 amps for a certain time, 6 hours, and then he moved and fed the system from 4 amps to 20 amps, 4 to 5 amps. And that way, he was able to disrupt equilibrium right here in this area, okay? The extraction was done by a heat exchanger that you can see right here. And the energy, the usage of the energy was done by the chiller and heater. The reason I put this experiment first is because you have the 3 steps clearly marked right here, okay? You can see the reference. You want to know more about this experiment, you can read it here. Also, materials involved: lead PT, D2O, LiOD, lithium. This is really important because when you have PEPs, nature will take whatever is around that PEP. Okay. Normally what's around that lower energy density around the bubble is the material the device is made of. Okay, so this is important. So for you guys that are experimenting with something, if you have something that kind of looks like what Takahashi did, maybe you want to try one of these elements. Okay, let's go to the next experiment. Celani experiment. Okay, the disruption was done by heat, voltage, and fluid. Yeah, he used different ranges of voltages on different fluids. The extraction method was temperature of fluids. Okay, if you run something and you don't extract the energy somehow, you won't get the results you want. In this case, he used the temperature and then cool down the fluid, again using a heat exchanger. It's very similar to the other one, Takahashi, but it did a different way, and he used different fluid and different materials. He used copper and nickel. You can read more about it on Celani. You have the reference here if you're interested in knowing more about that. Another interesting device is Andrea Rossi. Okay, he used eruption by heat, voltage, and air. The extraction was by same thing by temperature of the fluid, but he ran an HVAC, an air conditioning system. Okay, I'm going to explain this a little bit because it has some really cool things that you can learn from. We can all learn from. These are like resistances that uses heat, but these resistance are embedded right here on this layer. Okay, this is layer number 40, is 40 right here. Okay, so these resistance are embedded on top, on the layers on top, that even Andrea Rossi calls them fuel. So when he runs different voltages and heat, the heat makes air to run through here, and that turbulent flow of heat combined with the fuel creates the PEPs. And then those PEPs react with the layers of fuel, which are made of nickel, lithium, aluminum. And I think it's pretty cool because this is relatively simple and we can use it. You want more info, you can look at the patent right here. Searle effect. This is one of my favorite ones. Okay, the disruption was done by magnetic fields. Okay, I'm assuming most of you guys already are familiar with this, but you have a center plate with different materials, mainly copper, neodymium, Teflon, and other rare earth metals. And then you have rolls on the side. These rolls rotate in this way and about its own axis, and it also rotates about the center plate. So these are coils that extract magnetism or energy from the system. And when they do, they create some bubbles here. They create low energy density bubbles, which force nature to make energy rearrangements. And that's how this thing works. Okay. Finally, the usage. Well, it can be used for anti-gravity, because for some reason, some of the energy or some of the PEPs are filled with gravity. Instead of just being filled with any other material, some of them are filled by gravity. If you want more information, you can look at the documentary. I didn't find much info about this. The reason I put this in is because I actually spent a few days at the lab with Fernando Morris in Southern California. I actually saw firsthand the mock-up that they used to make the film. And I even read some of the books that Dr. Searle read, or the ones that he wrote to, is very interesting. He was obsessed with magic squares, and I actually got some of that obsession too. They're incredible. Okay, it's incredible how these numbers match up with each other. But anyways, you can read more about magic squares and the Searle story. Okay, another device that I want to bring to your attention. Oh, by the way, I chose these devices not because they're the only ones. Actually, there are a number of these devices, interesting ones, but these devices are a little bit different, and these devices give us something to learn from. Okay, transparently less transistor radio receiver. The disruption of the disruption is done by radio frequencies and by transistor oscillators. Okay, the extraction of coils. Do you use the word there, transistor? The extraction of coil, extraction is done by coils and capacitors. Here are the coils, here are the capacitors. And the usage, they use the same energy to run the radio transmitter and the speaker. So what's the interesting part about this is that he uses capacitors to tune the system, okay? Back in the days, they didn't have such a good electronic system, so they can condition the signal or time the feeding or the frequency. So what he did, he changed the capacitance of the capacitors. Okay, the materials that he used was copper from the coils, aluminum and tantalum, and silver from the capacitors. Tuning was capacitor. You can find more info in the patent here if you are interested in more info. Okay, another interesting device is the Hendershot generator. Okay, the disruption is done by radio frequencies. Okay, and the extraction is done by capacitors, just like the other one, the capacitors and coils. And the usage, he used an output load, and he also used a solenoid buzzers with an iron bar and permanent magnets. The interesting part about this is that it was done back in the days also when he didn't have much electronics. But instead of changing the capacitance of the capacitors, he used this system of the iron bar and the permanent magnet. And he used this system, the clapper. So if he adjusts the distance between the iron bar and the permanent magnet, the clapper would act different at different frequencies. Okay. So the way he tuned this whole system was by adjusting the distance with just a screwdriver. He adjusts the system, and the way it extracted energy, it's by the frequency in which the clapper was activated or the buzzer was activated. So the main point of this Henderson generator is that the way he tuned it was by the third step on the usage of buzzers or the output load, okay? So the three steps are present right here on this system, but the adjustment happens at the very end, at the very last step. That's the interesting part about this. Okay, if you want to use that on your systems, because I see that some people have different system, very interesting system. Some of them I don't even understand it, but they look promising. If you want more info about this system, you can go to Kelly's 1987, the manual for free energy devices. This is interesting, has a lot of information on it. Another device that you may want to look at is the Stanley Measure Field device. I'm sure most of you know about this. The disruption was done mainly by moving water, by using high frequency pulses. Also, he stopped for a few cycles, okay? And finally, I believe cavitation also. It has to do with with these devices working, okay? Back when Stanley Major was working on these devices, he didn't know much about cavitation. I don't think anybody knew about that. But cavitations are the implosions of these little bubbles that the gas makes, and the implosion makes a big difference. And I'm saying this because I myself did some experimenting with this, and there's a huge difference. The more bubbles you have and the more bubbles you can implode within the system, the more energy you get out of it. So even though Stanley Major didn't specify, I believe the cavitation also has a lot to do with the efficiency of his device. The way he extracts the energy is by directing the hydrogen and the oxygen to the combustion chamber. And the way he used that energy right away by burning it on the combustion chamber. You can read more about this. Here are some references. And at the end, the Kerbeck. He did a really, really nice job analyzing the Stanley Major, okay? This Kerbeck 2007. It's a 250 pages report. It's really, really nice. Another device that I would like to bring up to your attention is the Panton reactor. Even though this is not on my favorite list, the reason I put it here is because some of you are looking into using liquid fluid for anti-gravity. Okay, and managing liquid is kind of a different animal, okay? And this Panton reactor uses a lot of fluid, and maybe we can use some of the logic so we can get anti-gravity here, okay? Let me explain a little bit about the Panton reactor. Well, first of all, Panton runs a motor regularly with the gasoline, and then the exhaust of that gasoline engine is run through here. It heats up the reactor, and then the same exhaust gases go to what he called the bubbler right here. But the bubbler is filled with alternative fuel. Let's say any other, could be water, any other fuel, fluid. He even says that he can run a motor with jalapeno juice. Some people said that he runs on jalapeno juice too. But anyways, right here goes the alternative fluid. It mixes it with the exhaust gases and then brings it back to the combustion, to the reactor, okay? Once these gases are conditioned, then goes to the center part of the reaction where it mixes with a magnetized rod, okay? Here in the information I have, he doesn't show the exact material that the rod is made of. He just says a steel rod, and it has like a different weird shape at the beginning. I personally think that he doesn't have necessarily this shape, and also he treats this rod. That's why it works, and I think that's the way he protects his invention. But I didn't find any more info. I was trying to get the material or the treatment that rod undergo, but I couldn't find anything. But the reason I bring this up, like I said before, for those of you that are trying to use the fluid for anti-gravity, you may want to look into this closely and see what it can be done and what we can learn. Okay, here in the reactor, we have turbulent flow. We have two different materials, the tube on the top and the center rod. And we have different temperatures because it's not the same temperature all around. Just to bring food to your imagination. Now, the extraction of Paul Panton is just pointing the gases, the prepared gases back to the intake of the engine until It just stops the gas and it runs the engine with the alternative fuel. Okay, some of the materials involved just for the very beginning is CO2, the O2, and different hydrocarbons, because this is what comes out of the engines normally. Also the iron, because of the center rod, and other combinations that like I said before, I think that's the way he protects his invention, by not, by not telling anybody or not writing it anywhere. Another interesting thing I have about Pantone is that I actually saw him in one of the extraordinary technology events. I think it was in Albuquerque. And it was good. He was doing his shop, and many people attended and nobody complained about his device. Then he was taken to the psychiatric hospital and nobody knew where he was at, okay? And then I went to another Tesla Tech conference in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we were in the dining room just at night. And for some reason, people allow Paul Pantone to call one of the attendees here, and they put the phone on the speaker, and the speaker on a bigger speaker, so everybody could hear that. And I could hear personally how Paul Pantone was saying how they didn't let him sleep, that sometimes he couldn't eat, and he was going crazy. After he was released, he never made his reactor work. I don't know why, but it's something to consider at this point. Okay, that's interesting. It seems like all the good info is already suppressed, but nevertheless, I believe at some point it did work. Well, I'm going to stop here on the devices, but there are some worth mentioning, which is Hutchinson is the first one. What I believe happens with Hutchinson is that he created so many PEPs, so many PEPs, that nature had to break things apart. In order to nature bring things to equilibrium, he had to break things apart, or he had to melt two different devices together, two different materials together, or he had some levitation. I'm sure if John Hutchinson would have put a way of extract energy, he would have get an amazing generator, energy generator. Or maybe he did, most likely he did, and he just was forbidden to do it. Other interesting devices to mention: Aspden Howard, Chinkaliu Lloyd, Bruce De Palma, Declare. This is the one with the cavitation. This is very interesting. Also, the new discoveries in nanotubes. I believe with these new discoveries in nanotubes, we're going to be able to use it to our advantage, especially with the stuff that Mark Sokol is doing. I believe he's in the right track, and with a little bit of help with the materials department, it will be amazing. It will not take longer before he does amazing work. Anyway, some additional comments. Let the system breathe. Okay, it's mentioned on Omasa. By the way, Omasa created a method of converting elements. Okay, it's a very interesting article. I recommend you read it. Okay. Also, Stanley Major, he uses a different frequency, but at some point he stops. Okay, he stops completely and it starts all over again. So this is something that I don't see people doing a lot of times, and that's something to consider. Stop and then do it all over again, or do the cycle again. Stop for a few seconds or nanoseconds, or stop for a few cycles. Also, another story, Ralph Rink, who worked with the Otis car. He also said, let the system breathe. There's a story that he tells in one of his videos where NASA was building the Otis car, was replicating the Otis car, but they couldn't make it work. So the NASA guys knew about Ralph Ring and that he worked with Otis car. So they called him up. When Ralph Ring saw the device, he told him that let the system breathe. And the system, when they do it, the system worked. But later on, they stopped doing it and they kept doing their own thing. When Ralph Ring asked them, like, what happened? Why you don't do what I told you to do? The answer from NASA was, well, we get paid to look for answers, not to find the answers. Okay. And well, that's a great impact on me because I grew up thinking about working for NASA, and that really, that really scares me. No, that one and other things, you know, I actually had a chance to work for NASA at some point, and I declined. I met a lot of people that actually work for NASA, and they're ashamed to say that they did work for NASA for these type of reasons. Okay, now let's go to the next, well, additional comments. Okay, to do your devices, you can use DNA sequences, Fibonacci, magic squares, Fourier series, perfect ratio, the fractal conjugate of Dan Winter. Well, I never heard anyone talking about Dan Winter on his stuff. He's got pretty good stuff. Sometimes he's a little overboard. It's crazier than we normally are, but he's got good things to show, at least to look at. Okay, and if you incorporate some of his ideas into your designs, I believe you can make your devices work. The same goes for Edward Grant and Marco Rodin. Well, you already know him. You already know his work. Okay, now let's go to the interesting parts, the possibilities in anti-gravity. Okay. Well, the same pattern is found in Searle that I already mentioned, also in the Otis car, and also in the Alzofon devices. But before I go into the pattern, I'm going to explain more a little bit how nuclear orientation, magnetism, and gravity works. I make these little things just to exemplify and to make it simpler to form my idea to express it and to explain it. Imagine this yellow cloud is gravity. It's always coming down from the top to the bottom. This arrow is the nuclear orientation, the nuclear of the atomic orientation. And this is the magnetic source, you know, showing here a coil. And the stuff on the left part of the screen is a magnetic field. When the magnetic field is deactivated, on the right side of the screen, we have a system where the magnetic field is activated. It's the same thing, but just the field activated. And you have this green space here, okay? Now, what would you think will happen when you deactivate the magnetic field right on this part? Yeah, some PEPs are formed, some lower energy density spaces are formed, okay? And that's what we have to take advantage of, okay? When there are these PEPs and the conditions around here are the right conditions, nature will use gravity to fill up these PEPs, okay? This is how it will look a system where you can have anti-gravity, okay? Right here. So the ideal process for anti-gravity should be to let the gravity constantly refill the PEPs, constantly refill these lower energy density bubbles. Say you turn off the magnetic field, then you turn it off, let the bubbles stay there, let absorb the gravity, okay, of all the places all around it. And that means all the space below will not feel the force of gravity, okay? You have to use it on top. I would suggest use it on the cover. If you have like a flying saucer make the cover of the flying saucer have this system, okay? Create a lot of PEPs on it, let the gravity fill up the PEPs so that everything that's below doesn't feel the gravity. Well, and these are some of the recommendations. Look for a way to safely create PEPs. Okay, in general, this is in general, it's not just the Alzofon. This is in general for anti-gravity, according to my hypothesis and what I believe. Stay away from microwaves. I know it will be easier to create the PEPs and to make it work, but when you use it in real life, especially when you're working in the lab, it's very dangerous. Especially you want to make a flying saucer that you want to get on board. That's not a good thing. Second, create the right surroundings, okay? This is the secret. If you create the right surroundings around where the PEPs are at, you're gonna make nature use gravity to fill up the PEPs. And this is the secret actually to everything. If you create the PEPs in a place in such a way that you tell nature what to do, because nature is going to do whatever is easier, faster, and better for nature to do. So if you create those lower energy densities in special places, you can control nature. The material for the cover or for the anti-gravity has to be hard for gravity to change to the right nuclear orientation. You see, well, I'm not sure if you guys are looking at me, but if, let's say, the nuclei is oriented a little bit sideways, not the way it normally is. It's oriented towards the magnetic field. When you remove the magnetic field, some materials will go back immediately to the normal direction of the nuclei. But no, we have to get a material that doesn't go back as fast as normal, okay? And for that, we can use aluminum. Aluminum is the material that most people agree on. Alzofon mentions that the right materials are the ones that have longer time with respect to thermal decay. And this is written on the Alzofon report. Okay, now let's go to the OT-SCAR now. OT-SCAR uses, as a disruption method, which is step number 1, uses the ultron energy accumulators, which are spinning capacitors made of metallic material on an unusual shape. Okay. Step number 2, the extraction of energy is done by the same accumulators, but they discharge into electromagnets around the rotating disk, okay? But they have these 3 steps. That's the interesting thing. And they use it on their own system, okay? The main point is that they use special spinning capacitors to disrupt the equilibrium, and they're spinning. That's also another important point. To create these PEPs in the right place so gravity can be used, is more likely to obtain these proper places if we rotate, okay? Rotation, for me, is essential to make things fly and to get anti-gravity. Most of you, or some of you may not agree with me, but that's okay. This is just my opinion. And the tuning method, these are the RPMs. You can read more about this OT-SCAR in these 2 references. Now let's go to the Alzofon experiment. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about this. Well, as you can see here on the drawing on top, he wasn't much of a builder, at least not when he wrote this article, which, by the way, I love this article, okay? It kind of fit perfectly into my ideas, and also gives lots of information, lots of details, and also gives lots of references. So it's great. Thank you for whoever shared that. Thank you very much. Now, the disruption in the Alzofon vehicle is done by a microwave source and a modulation generator. Mark already explained a lot about that. On the extraction method, I'm gonna show some screenshots of the article. Okay, I believe, I'm sure you guys read this, or at least Mark, but this probably didn't pay much attention to this. It's right here. It says it's possible to formulate a method of reducing mean energy of the random virtual processes asserted to be responsible for the gravitational field, and therefore reduce the gravitational force. So he says it's right here, reducing mean energy. And it's gotta be important because he mentioned it twice just in the introduction, okay? The same picture, same, another paragraph, but same introduction says, altering the mean energy associated with these processes can be expected to alter the gravitational field, okay? And he mentions the same mean energy several times, at least 5 times in the entire report. Okay. Now, let's look at these other, oops. Let's look at this other picture from the same report, which, by the way, this is the report, the Anti-Gravity with Present Technology, Implementation and Theoretical Foundation, July 27, Colorado Springs, Colorado. That's where I get this energy, pictures from. Now, in the second introduction says, a process analogous to those which reduce the gas temperature by allowing gas molecules to do work against an external agent, converting internal random disordered motion into an external ordered motion. What does that mean? This is step number 1 and number 2 and number 3 of my hypothesis, okay? Because he's extracting energy and transporting some of the energy and use it somewhere else, okay? He used the analogous to those with reduced the gas temperature. As you could see on the previous examples of Takahashi or Andrea Rossi, they both use this system, okay, to extract energy and use it. And Alzofon mentions it, but for some reason, he's not, I don't think he built anything after this, but the replication attempts did not include this part. And I think this is an essential part for the Alzofon experiment to work, okay? All right, let me move on. Well, in summary, well, there's plenty of energy. We saw that at the beginning. Extraordinary devices break equilibrium, causing energy rearrangements. At this point, energy is extracted out of the zone and is used. And many extraordinary devices follow this pattern. They first disrupt equilibrium. They create the PEPs or lower energy density spaces. They extract energy, and then they use it in real time. All these 3 steps have to be synchronized and tuned perfectly to work. And you have to use proper material, okay? I was so happy that Mark Sokol got the CVD to make the proper material. I think he's in the right path, and pretty soon they will be making some really good stuff. Okay, then under certain conditions, gravity is used by nature to bring things to equilibrium, and that's what causes the mass below the apparatus to not feel any effects of gravity. And one more thing, nature brings things to equilibrium, and nature doesn't care if his action agree with physics. They don't care if it agrees with the string theory or if it agrees with their general relativity. Nature does whatever is necessary to bring things to equilibrium. And this is the thing that I believe is the most important that we have to consider, because we're trying to theorize and oh, this is possible, this is not possible. Nature doesn't care. It doesn't care if corporate academia actually approves it or not. It just does what it needs to do. Okay. And yeah, this is it. Let me just exit here, and I expect any questions or comments. Thank you for listening.
Well, Pepe, again, thank you, sir. So let me do this. I want to put this thing on gallery view. Everybody, please give an enormous hand to Mr. Jose Ruiz. Pepe,
Thank you.
enormous hand for an in-depth and very detailed presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
You actually drilled down incredibly well. It's so granular to be able to go through it like that. Thank you so much for going through all of the different, going through the types of devices and being able to outline what makes them unique and how they're using energy and how they're shuffling energy around. I think that's very valuable. It's a really good high-level overview, and I loved your examples as well. So thank you again, sir. So let's